government on the GP contract. During that time, so I was not only involved with that, but particularly involved with PCNs, and safer working is something which hopefully you've come across, which was a sort of concept which I developed and rolled out for general practice, and then our manifesto as well. Now, because it's a political elected role, it sort of all came to a sudden screeching halt back in August when a new committee and a new chair was elected. So I can be even more indiscreet than I was when I was in that position. But I got to know Joe and Kay and the other directors from IGPM, because part of my role was to liaise with other organisations, so the Royal College of GPs and IGPM and other representative organisations. So I had a really brilliant crash course from them in the sort of the wider work that practice managers do. Because I've been a GP since 2006. I've worked with lots of practice managers, but actually it really brought home to me all those things that Joe's just been describing in terms of, you are the operational arm of general practice. It's idiots like me that come up with crackpot ideas. You all hang your heads and say, well, how on earth are we going to do that? And then you actually do go and do it. And so I think that the IGPM, the work that they're doing, I think is really crucial in terms of not professionalising you, because you're already professionals, but actually that sort of organisation, that representative work, that power in being a cohesive group in order to sort of raise your profile within general practice. So actually, those people that actually make general practice work, are more centrally involved in the development of it. And so we can really sort of harness your skills and abilities to make sure that that really works for the future. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about where are we, what are we doing, where are we going. And when I was talking to Joe and the team, they said, well, let's talk a bit about hope. So I don't really do hope. My job working for a trade union is to go around and galvanise people, and that really works well if you say, well, it's all a bit rubbish, because you can get people a bit cross. But actually, we do need hope. There is hope. Otherwise, what on earth are we doing? And I was just listening to David and thinking, well, actually, how have we got rose-tinted spectacles for the past? I remember my first job in the NHS was in 1995, and I remember the junior doctors being quite unhappy around that sort of time, and funny enough, they're still quite unhappy at the moment. I was quite unhappy when I was a junior doctor. So, we've gone through those cycles, and actually general practice does go through boom and bust. And, you'll recognise it when it comes to recruitment. We can go through times when you can't find a GP for love nor money, and then other times you'll have 50 applicants for a post. And so, we are going through a cycle, and, hopefully we are coming towards an upswing at the moment. So this is what I want to talk a bit to you about today. So we're going to talk about what on earth is going on at the moment. What the hell is happening in general practice, and why is it like it is? I will talk a bit about safer working, and what is sustainable general practice. So these are things that we can be doing now to make our lives a bit better in general practice. And where are we going? What does the future hold? So what the hell is going on? So this government has unfortunately not really taken a very collaborative view of how to work with general practice over the last couple of years. So we've had 2 contracted positions in a row. Now that's meant that we have had, within the context of a 5-year PCN DES framework, we've got a contract which was designed for a pre-pandemic world. We've got a contract that was designed for inflation being negligible. We've got a contract that was designed for without foreseeing a war in Ukraine and other kinds of things which have driven up cost pressures. And we've got a contract that wasn't designed for a workload and workforce crisis. So we've got a world that we're living in with a government that has not reflected on those kinds of real world changes that we've all experienced, which are having an impact on all of you and all of your practices right now. And this has really hit our morale hard. So not just GPs, but practice managers. Life is difficult, life is hard, you're having to work incredibly hard, you're struggling to recruit, you're struggling to keep your team there. When we're finding that reception staff are choosing to go and work in Costa Coffee because they make more per hour than they can do in general practice, because we can't actually afford to give them a pay rise which reflects their value and inflation and work and cost pressures, then it makes our lives very, very difficult. And this has unfortunately not been noted by governments and come up with a variety of interesting excuses as to why that shouldn't be reflected. And it comes down to sort of the attitude of a government. Now, without meaning to be nakedly political, we've been through a variety of secretaries of state over the last couple of years. Therese Coffey, I would probably differ on Therese Coffey's value if I'm entirely honest. Although I wouldn't say that Steve Barclay's particularly any better. Now, of course, we all know that we have politicians who don't necessarily know what the job is like. I'm sure that if Steve Barclay came in here, he'd be gobsmacked to discover that practices had practice managers, let alone what you actually did on a day-to-day basis. And so that does really make life rather difficult when you're talking to these people. Now, we have got a general election coming up, and so we have. This is where some of the hope comes in, because there is potentially an opportunity. Again, without being nakedly political, whatever happens, there is probably going to be some kind of change of government, and I think the whole of the healthcare system is waiting with some form of bated breath as to what is going to happen. So, whilst we've had a 5-year settlement with the PCN basis, that's coming to an end at the end of March next year. Now, GPC is going, or the officer team is going into negotiations very shortly. There's a national meeting today when they'll be presenting what their negotiation plan is, and the plan is then to have a period of 2 to 3 months of negotiation in order to come up with what will be an interim contract for 1 year. It should be like a bridging contract, so don't expect there to be either complete continuation of that which we have now, nor that there be a whole new 5-year framework. And I think the general practice, like most healthcare professionals, would prefer not to get tied into a long-term deal again. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Now, all manner of things seem like a good idea at the time. I'm sure we could all sort of walk around and, we've all got the T-shirt, haven't we? Unfortunately, and whilst we couldn't foresee a pandemic, etc., we recognise that really we don't want to be having something which ties us into a straitjacket over a long period of time. So I'll come back to what sort of that next year might look like in a bit. And of course, we've had the advent of ICB. So we've gone from a sort of the CCG type system to evolving into ICBs and ICSs, and the NHS will often go through a bigger, smaller cycle over a period of years, and it's going back to a bigger cycle at the moment. Now, lots of GPs I know are quite anxious about this as they lose those sort of local contacts with CCG colleagues, and of course ICBs are facing up to 40% of budget and staffing cuts. Now, whilst the Daily Mail might have us believe that we're awash with management who are all completely useless, I think that actually most of us would recognise that high quality management is crucial to make sure that we can actually get stuff done. As demonstrated by all of you wonderful people here today. Practices will not operate without you. Actually, we do need a degree of management across our whole system in order to make sure that healthcare works. And so ICBs, whether we collectively feel that they're a good thing or not, are probably going to go through a period of time of restructuring and struggling to find a way of making sure that everything works. There's quite, as ever, there's quite a lot happening in general practice and in the NHS. So, what can we do? What can we do about this? Well, we've got a contract. We can't, none of us in this room can change that at the moment. We have to work within the constraints of the contract that we have. But we can work within the constraints of the contract that we have in order to change how we're working in our practices. Now, this is where I talked about safer working. So some of you will have seen, the headline is invariably capping your contracts at about 25 per GP or per clinician per day, which on the face of it, lots of people say to me, well, that's impossible, well, that's nonsense. But actually, there are ways and means of getting to that. I'll come back to that in the next slide. And sustainable general practice, it's about getting down to doing what we can do for the patient in front of us on what we can do for our patients in our practices, and actually trying to get rid of a lot of the extraneous nonsense which does consume a lot of our time, a lot of our resource, but either we're not funded for, doesn't derive a great deal of patient benefit, or is uneconomic and inefficient. So it is about prioritisation and actually recognising the fact that we are funded to provide a needs-based service, not a wants-based service. Now, politicians might say that general practice will provide everything for everybody all the time, but everybody in this room recognises that is simply impossible within the funding envelope and within the resource envelope that we have. So therefore, we need to provide what patients need, and that does involve some prioritisation and using the most difficult word for GPs, which is the word no. Now, we all struggle with that. You probably struggle with it less than GPs do. But it is crucial that we actually start to recognise that in order for our patients to continue to receive the healthcare that we all provide, that we must prioritise those that need it the most. We must actually stop doing things which are inefficient and take us away from providing care. You know, whether that be, you know, yes, we can sign a form to do a parachute. Yes, we can a parachute jump. Yes, we can go and do this, that, and the other. But the things like providing unfunded work for secondary care, and we all see that all the time. The amount of workload that comes down to us from secondary care, which we're not funded to provide, the workload that comes to us from private providers. You know, the private ADHD assessment that all of a sudden expects us to be providing X, Y, or Z. The letter from our wonderful colleagues in hospital saying that GPs can kindly do X, Y, and Z. Please check serum rhubarb 3 times a week and make sure you pop around and make the patient a cup of tea as well. All of these kinds of things, actually, we do need to start making sure that we say no to, because otherwise it devalues all of us and the care that we provide for our patients, and we do a disservice to our patients by trying to do other parts of the system's work for them. So we must feel empowered to be able to do that. And go back to core general practice, that which it says that we need to be providing in our contracts. And PCNs, now I've had my teeth kicked in an awful lot talking about PCNs over the last few years, because I'm very aware that they are a great success in some places and they're a disaster in others. And what I really feel is really important is that we make sure that PCNs are locally flexible to the needs of your practice, your patients, and your staff, and you utilise particularly the ARS staff as much as possible to support the provision of your core offering. So that means using your clinical pharmacists, FCPs, care navigators, all of those kinds of people to support your practice's core provision of general practice. Yes, they have to do some specific work associated with PCNs, but the whole concept was that they were there to support general practice, not to have add a whole extra layer of complexity, difficulty, hard work, and headaches. So safer working. So yes, the headline is about coming down to around 25 contacts per day. And the reason for that is because I've been talking to practices over the last few years where there are GPs that are having 100 contacts per day. I came across one individual recently who was making up to 300 telephone calls per day, because that GP felt, that GP felt that they had to, anybody that contacted them, they had to make sure that they provided that care. That's not what your contract says. As you know, because you know the GMS contract better than most GPs, it says that we need to provide for the reasonable needs of our patients. And it is that wonderful word reasonable, because it is you that defines what is reasonable. Yes, in conjunction with your patient groups, but it is you that defines what is reasonable based on the resource that you have and the staffing that you have. And so looking to what is safe. Not just safe for patients, because yes, that 299th patient is not going to get the same level of care as that first patient per day. My brain's fried when I've been there for 12 hours a day. And so my ability to make decisions if I'm contacting 100 patients is not as good as it is for those first 10 or 25. But also safe for those clinicians working in practice. So yes, I might say GPs, but I also mean your ANPs, I also mean your paramedics, I mean everybody else clinically offering care in your practices. They have decision fatigue and they will burn out. You can't provide 300 contacts per day I couldn't do it for a week. I certainly couldn't do it in the long term. And so we must make these changes in order to make sure that we preserve our workforce, look after our patients. Because if you get the GMC, you make a mistake, you end up in front of them and say, well, actually, no, it was a really hard day, it was the end of the day. And I don't want to speak to 90 people, they're not going to care, they're going to strike that doctor off. And when that person's mental health suffers as a result of burning out, then we've lost somebody else to the workforce. So we have to be making these changes to preserve our practices. Now, small incremental changes is the key. You're not going to have a D-Day. You're not going to go from having 40 contacts a day to having 25, but you're going to make small changes over time. So my practice, pre-COVID, 36 appointments per day. We're now down at 26, and that's been a 3-year change. We've tried a variety of different things over time. We have a mixture of face-to-face and telephone. We've largely moved to 15-minute consultations. I would say, from my point of view, I do 4 surgeries per week. I'm about to be about 6. It's made a considerable difference to the care that I can provide for people. I'm a GP with special interest in mental health, so I see lots of students with mental health problems. The quality of the consultation I can offer in that 15 minutes is very, very different to that which I was offering in 8 to 10. So these kinds of small changes do make a difference. And if you go from offering 36 appointments a day to offering 34 tomorrow, actually it's not a dramatic difference, but it will, for the patients in terms of the offering that you have, but it will make a difference to that clinician. And those small changes over time, acclimatising your practice and your patient population to small changes allows better quality of consultation and better morale, not just in your clinicians, but actually within your entire workforce. Now, using Opal systems, I don't know if you've got an Opal system locally, where you can report the pressures that your practices are experiencing. It gets escalated to the LMC and to the ICB. That generates leverage for there to be more systemic changes. Because one of the things that we really advocate is utilising your walk-in centres, your overflow hubs, and things of that sort, and directing to an NHS 111 when you're at safe capacity. Using triage is really crucial, so whether you be your care navigators or you have clinicians triaging, so that those people get the care that they need from the right person the first time. And recruitment and retention, as I say, does make a difference with that. Local adaptation is important. I can't come out to you, any of you, and tell you how to run your practice. I can run my practice. I can't go down the road and tell a practice next door to me in Kingston how to run theirs, because they've got a subtly different population. So this is about looking at many of different options. There is no one size fits all. NHS England and government might think there's a one size fits all, but there's not. All of your practices are different, and they all need to be adapted to your local population and your staffing. Measure everything. It's really important, so you can start measuring your contacts. All those little telephone calls that people make based on a blood result or a doc letter or something like that. Start putting it in your appointment books. Encourage your GPs to do so, because that will demonstrate the work that you're actually doing. So much of what we all do is not measured, and that really helps in terms of getting extra resources and telling people how hard you're working in order to make sure that it continues to be sustainable. Do engage with your LMC. It is really important, and make sure that you utilise them to be interfacing with the ICB in order that they are supportive as well. And safer working is a journey, not a destination. It's not a make the change, you can do it tomorrow. It's a what can we do, how can we adapt things. And like all of us, we've all changed our appointment systems 100 times, haven't we? There's no such thing as a perfect appointment system. But as we change them all gently over time, we can derive greater benefit for our patients and for our practices. So I'm rattling through because I want to give a bit of time for us to have any questions as well. So what does the future look like? Now, there is going to be a transitional year. And I think that that's of benefit to all of us, because we don't want to get tied into a long-term deal again, because who knows what's going to happen in the future. And government, God love them, are not going to suddenly come in and say, well, we'll lock in a 5.5% inflationary rise every year. So we need to actually be a bit smart about this. So what we really want to see in the short term is a reduction in workload, because the government's not going to turn up with a big check. It would be lovely if they did, but they're not going to. They're not going to turn around and say, well, actually, we really recognise all your arguments, and yes, GMS is worth 250,000 patients. So yes, we've got it wrong all these years. Here's a nice big fat check. That'd be lovely, but it's not going to happen. But what we can do is we can shift the quantum by making sure that they take workload out of the contract. Now that may be around QOF, that may be around IAF targets. We saw that last year with a whole load of the IAF money going into the access component of the PCN DES. So if we can shift money from one part of the contract to another, lock it into core, then that will make a difference to practice, because if we're scurrying around this to do a whole load of nonsense and submit figures which are the pain of your lives to little benefit, then that will actually start to benefit patients, because we can then start directing the resource within your practices towards direct patient care as opposed to collecting nonsense numbers. Oops. So general election, post-general election, who knows what's going to happen? Wes Streeting comes up with some interesting things. Now, I've not met Wes, but I've met his SPAD, so his special advisor. He was a GP trainee in North London. Now, it's a slightly quirky one. Yes, it's good that he's got somebody associated with general practice, but I'll recognise that I was a GP trainee in North East London as well. I didn't know a great deal about general practice when I was a trainee. So we'll have to see, and obviously he comes out with some quirky things which he then often backtracks from as well, but there is an opportunity for GPC to influence him in the run-up to the election. They're also working with other political parties as well, and will continue to try to influence the Tory government, because who knows what's going to happen at the next election. We could have a party of almost any colour getting into power, or a coalition, so it is important that sort of lobbying takes place in order to influence what a future contract beyond this transitional year might look like. PCNs are not going to disappear. There is, there is often, sorry, keep pressing the wrong button. There are many GPs that have said, we want to get rid of PCNs, put the money into core, get rid of it. With the best will in the world, it's not going to happen. And what we really need to see is that PCNs evolve into something that's locally flexible. It allows you to recruit those ARS staff that you need, not those that are just off a specific menu. And that actually, it allows practices to work together in a far more organic way, as opposed to the one-size-fits-all shoehorn type approach that's been taken so far. Now, the Fuller stocktake, you'll probably be familiar with. Claire Fuller obviously was around this area, and she's now moved into the director of general practice at NHS England. So, that rather sort of telegraphs that that is a move that is going to be sort of, cemented in really, and it will be moving towards a neighbourhood type approach. Now, I know that in Surrey Heartlands, for example, they've already got a lot of that going on already. But look at the Fuller stocktake, because that probably gives us a bit of a sense of where the plans at NHS England are going. And continuity of care, now this is something that we've all been saying for a long time. Actually, patients prefer continuity of care, provides better care. There's lots of great evidence for it, and actually politicians are starting to pay attention. David said earlier that the mood music in the press has changed a little bit about general practice. Yes, the Daily Mail will still turn up and give us a bit of a kicking, but they are tending to recognise that problems in general practice are due to government, not due to us being sat there with our feet up on the desks all day. Continuity of care is one of those things that politicians and the press are starting to recognise is important. So that's the sort of thing that is really going to be a priority for negotiation going forward. And so, just to finish off there, so there is hope. There is hope. I'm not giving up. I've spent too long doing this. I'd probably be useless doing anything else. And you've probably got far more transportable skills than I've got. But you're all invested in your practices. You're there. You want to see them a success, and you're making a success of your practices despite all the barriers that are thrown at you by NHS England and government. And you can continue to do that, and you will continue to do that. And if we can see some changes nationally, we can see a thriving general practice that supports our patients as well as you and our GPs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard. Good man, good man. So I hope there's some questions, and whilst you're formulating your question, putting your hand up, I'll ask you one, which is, I've always struggled on the serum rhubarb issue. Because when I've got a letter saying, please do this, and I don't do it, I sort of feel I'm letting my patient down, or at least very much they'll feel that I'm letting them down. And actually, if I've got the letter in my hand, it's often quicker just to do it than to try and find a consultant and argue. How do you cope?
So, yes, that's absolutely it. It's often quicker to just do it and send it back. However, so many LMCs, I know Surrey and Sussex LMCs have this, they have a form letter which you can use. You can set up a system in your practice where you can just ping the doc man or whatever or however you use your workflow onto somebody who can send it straight back. Now, the medical director of my local trust in Kingston, I've known it for a long time, he did actually phone me about 6 months ago and said, look, Richard, if you please stop sending me these letters, I promise I will get the consultants to stop doing it, but for God's sake, stop sending me these letters. It does work. It is about holding a line and saying to the trust, actually, it's not my job. When my patient goes off to go and see an orthopaedic surgeon about their wonky knee, I don't ask you to do their diabetic check. And yes, that patient in front of you might say, well, actually, doc, why on earth aren't you doing this? You can just, the phlebotomist is free, why can't they do that? And it's about letting them know that I take responsibility for the work that I do, and if I do the work for the hospital, it means that you get less. That patient in front of you will get less because your phlebotomist is taking blood from them, which could have been taken up at the hospital, instead of that patient that needs their diabetic check doing in your practice. And if we can hold the line, we all get, and I know that herding GPs is like herding cats, but if we can get everybody in our practice to all do the same thing, and it comes back to that difficult question of saying no, it will make an incremental change.
Tricky. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Richard, one thing you haven't mentioned, I'm interested in your view on this, and if it's come up with LMCs and everyone else, is the swear of PCSE online. We could talk about the pressures in general practice and obviously the clinical pressures, but from a practice management point of view, probably the biggest swear, one of the biggest swear is PCSE online. And the mess that it creates every month, year, with everything from super contributions being miscollected or incorrectly allocated to payments coming in, which obviously very pertinent to cash flow, and also with the PCN modelling and it being, I will use the word debacle in terms of how it's coming into the PCNs, lead practice, or anything else. I just wonder if that comes up in conversations at sort of the higher tables.
Yeah, absolutely, and I absolutely recognise that PCSE and CAPTA are absolute rubbish. I've chosen my word very carefully there. But I mean, I absolutely recognise, and I don't think anybody in this room would minimise quite how crap they are and how much work that they actually generate for you. Now, when it moved over to CAPTA in terms of managing those kinds of things, there was a dramatic shrinking of the amount of resource that they got. They built more they could chew, and they've done a really poor job of it. They've lost an enormous amount of records. Now they have had their contracts renewed, so they go on further. Now that might seem like a completely bonkers thing, but on the plus side, it does mean that they've still got responsibility for sorting out those historical problems, where a new provider would just say, well, that was CAPTA, it's nothing to do with us, and would then draw a line under that, which would actually do none of us any benefit at all, and probably have an even smaller contract as well. It does come up, it is discussed a lot. Pensions are something that you all know that GPs are very interested in, and I think for many GPs, that's the only time these kinds of things really come into our consciousness, when you go to get your pension quote and discover that you've got a whole load of years missing. So it is very much on the agenda of GPC to hold PCSE to account, hold CAPTA to account, improve the way that they work, because poor cash flow can kill a business. And, if you've got a small practice and you suddenly have 2 or 3 months without sufficient cash flow coming through, it can put you absolutely on your skids to the point where you can't pay staff. So it is very much on the agenda in order to try to get them held to account and improve the service that they provide.
Richard, are we going to get the 6% next month?
So this has been fun. So this is yet another example of politicians making what sounds like a really, really good decision, and then suddenly everybody at NHS England putting their heads in their hands like you lot. This is like me saying we're going to do something wonderful to general practice, and every practice manager in the country puts their head in their hand when you try and work out how to do it. NHS England have been trying to work out how on earth to make this work, because there's not a very easy way of calculating what 6% of everybody's wages is. I'm expecting to hear today, so I've got a GPC meeting for the rest of today, so after coffee I'm going to have to shoot off for that. I'm expecting to hear there. The SFE are being published at the end of the month, so they want to have it clarified by then. But 6% sounds great, but it depends how it's calculated, because it could confer a great extra cost on practices, or it could be well-rounded and actually done properly and work out well for everybody. So GPC have been trying to make sure it's done properly, and then we've got some fabulous numbers people at the BMA who've been working on that in order to make sure that it works. So that's why there's been a delay, but I recognise the frustration.
Hi Richard, over here. I'm Nick. I'm generally suspicious of a round number, unless it's me using it to make a point. So I wondered, what's behind the 25 appointments a day or 15-minute appointments? Is there an evidence base of some sort? Is there some understanding of what's really there?
So the 25 appointments per day came from the Union of European Medical Organisations. So it's UMO, which published that about 5 years ago as being their best reckoning of a safe number. There is no empirical research base for this. Now, I try not to make things up on the hoof, but there is an element of utilising a variety of different sources to come to a number which is felt to be best. And it's really based on the UMO figure of what they feel to be safe, averages across Europe. If you also look back at, there was a policy document which was touted out by Sajid Javid shortly after he became, shortly after he left the health brief, which was from Policy Exchange, where he talked about 25 contacts per day being a safe level. So it's sort of drawing in a number of different evidence bases for that, but there's no empirical base. 15 minutes is based on what the Royal College of GPs recommend. But I think, you know, I'd love it if there was an academic department of general practice that went into this, but I don't think there's an appetite out there to do it. But it's within our gift. It's a change that we can all make. And, you know, your practice, 25 appointments might not be appropriate at all. It might be 22. It might be 30. But it's for all of our practices to decide ourselves in conjunction with our patient groups as to what is appropriate to provide for the reasonable needs of our patients. Yeah, I'll look back and then I'll come to you.
Yeah, hi, just a question about new doctors popping off the end of the production line. We use our staff wherever we can, make the best use out of them, but really there is a lack of doctors out there, and I'm not getting warm vibes about there's going to be any more anytime soon.
So, government's committed to increasing the number of GP trainees coming through. Now that's rather different to actually having more GPs, and of course we've seen massive attrition rates. So if you look at the arguments from the junior doctors at the moment, the number of people that aren't completing training or are completing training and then moving to Australasia or leaving the profession completely is up to 40%. Now the trouble is with increasing training places is there aren't necessarily the trainers out there, and there's certainly not the premises to stick them in. So it does need a far more cohesive and all-encompassing workforce plan from government. And the workforce plan was published previously was a little airy-fairy, shall we say, and had a lot of sort of good aspirations without any real plan to actually make it happen. The Labour Party saying that they're going to increase medical school places and things like that, so don't address those kinds of premises issues and things like that. So it remains a risk for the future. So I think what we can do for now is make sure that we retain people, and doing whatever we can do in our practice to make sure that we retain them. If we can stop that bleeding out. Now, if we can change the sort of mood music within general practice and make it look like a decent profession to be in, then it will encourage those medical students coming through and junior doctors to move into general practice. But we're looking at sort of a 10-year cycle really before we get to the point of having a stable, larger workforce really. But government need to sort out premises, they need to sort out training places and resourcing the whole lot anyway, because the current trainers throw up as peanuts. And it makes it look like it's not really worth your while to actually make that kind of effort. So that one wasn't full of hope, was it? Right, let's come back to the gentleman here at the front.
I'll try and use mine. It's just a brief question on the concept of workload reduction, to alluded to that being the primary focus of next year's contract discussions. I guess my experience over the last few years has been whenever something comes out of the contract, it generally pops up on the regulator's dashboard as something they need to then look at and monitor. So it doesn't actually turn into genuine workload reduction. Is that something that you're trying to address at the same time, or are we likely to see all of the IIF indicators and profit indicators if they drop out of contract popping up as something that CQC take much more interest in?
So that's a really good question. I think so one of the other organisations I met with regularly was CQC, and particularly Manny Hussain, who is the Director of Primary Care at CQC. And their remit is to monitor quality in general practice, as opposed so they would argue they're not looking at numbers, they're not interested in access, all those kinds of things. It's really about quality and demonstrating quality. Now, yes, those searches do often start to encompass those things, or even in some circumstances, even more stringently, those things that are encompassed by QOF and other sorts of targets we have to work to. Now, CQC, and so there's not, I'm not going to suggest that there's discussions between the two in order to stitch us up, but it does sometimes seem a little bit like that. But I think that what we've really got to do with any changes to our targets and workload is see that it makes a difference to our workload, because the QOF registers being guaranteed last year, it looks wonderful on paper. Of course, government can pop up and say, well, up to a third of GP targets have been guaranteed, but it made no difference to anybody's workload because we've got to maintain those lists anyway, because otherwise you don't get paid all the other work you do. So it's about making sure that any changes to QOF or other targets actually have a tangible difference on workload. And with CQC, I mean, there's a separate discussion with them to make sure that any kind of searches that they are demanding that we do are clinically relevant and do actually demonstrate patient safety and high quality care. So it's a difficult one, but it's a balance that's got to be struck in discussion with the two organisations. But I think the final thing I would say with that is that actually NHS England do recognise that they've got to do something about workload, because very slowly politicians have, the Department of Health have really recognised that if general practice fails, then we're all snookered.
We're going to have this as the last question, if we may.
Thank you. I'm Katie Hill. I'm a Chanticleer PCN manager, and prior to that, I was a practice manager for just under 20 years. So my question is sort of a combination of the two, really. You've really recognised the importance of management in talking to us today, and I just have some concerns around the transition for PCNs and the year ahead. In terms of, we are being given reassurances in regard to ours continue to employ the roles, and the money will be there in some form or another. But there has been no mention about any management support. We've been very lucky in Sussex that our ICB has supported management over the last 3 years, topping up the leadership and management funding. and recognise the importance of management. And my concern is that maybe, you know, if it's not recognised by NHS England, I know the leadership and management money may still carry on, but if there's no other support available and our ICB cannot provide that, which I'm sure will be the case, then this work may fall to practice managers. So that is my concern, that if it devolves out to practices, that is more workload on practice managers, more operations managers, deputies, etc. Do you have any sense of that? And if so, how can we flag it up?
Thank you. I think I completely agree with you. That is a real risk, and it's always been a risk. PCNs were born too early. They were brought out in a way that was probably a good concept, but didn't come out with the appropriate levels of management funding, and in some areas have almost become mini CCGs. They're a mini delivery arm of NHS England, but being done on shoestring, being done without that budget. And so having a PCN CD is fine, but I was a PCN CD, I'm about to go back and be one again. But I'm a GP, I'm not a manager. And actually the management component of it has failed to be recognised. Now people have been smart and have used development funds and things of that sort in order to make sure it works. So, excuse me. So you've been smart and made sure that you've made it work, and actually it's relied on a lot of goodwill of practice managers to work collaboratively and to be smart to make these kinds of things actually happen. But there must be funding, effective funding, that goes into PCNs in the future. Now, I'm not going to suggest that that's likely to happen this coming year, because it's likely to be a continuation really of the 5-year framework with some adaptations. But going on beyond there has to be some kind of funding, because otherwise PCNs will fail. And no matter what we think about them, NHS England don't want to fail. And so it's something that we've been doing for quite a long time, and this is where the IGPM has been very useful in terms of, sort of putting lots of thoughts into my head when I was negotiating with government on this, is that there must be effective support and resourcing for managers within management and, you know, the entire support side within PCNs, because you can't expect practices to do it, because otherwise they will fail. So yes, absolutely recognise it. Yes, absolutely been lobbying for it, and I would hope to see that coming in further. But I think that the sort of the hope component of this is that NHS England do not want to see PCNs fail, and so will do what they need to do in order to make sure that they succeed.
Richard, thank you so much for a very impressive presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Well, safe journey back to Surrey, back to Sussex again. It's been a great pleasure meeting you. Thanks. And it's coffee.